Hi, my name is Victor, and today I want to tell you about Annex. Annex is a set of extensible dev tools for Monorepos. It's been around for many years, and a lot of companies use it to power their development. So Annex is a general purpose tool, can be used for any technology, Java, .NET, Angular React, Node, but this particular video is for Angular developers. So a lot of what I'm going to tell you today will apply to any stack, but all the examples I will use will be in Angular. Okay? So if you're an Angular developer, why would you use Annex or say the Angular CLI? Firstly, Annex does use the Angular CLI, as we will see in a second, but there are several advantages to adding Annex to your Angular CLI project. Firstly, Annex helps you use modern tools like Cypress, Storybook, Jest, and Prettier, and setting up all these tools such that they work together well and maintaining the setup is effortful. And Annex has a bunch of plugins that work together really well, and they help you use all of these tools without any effort, as you will see. Secondly, Annex uses a robust computation cache, and it performs code change analysis to make sure your repo scales well. So you can grow your repo, grow the number of developers contributing to it, and everything remains very fast. It sounds like a bit too techy and too abstract. We're going to see what it means in practice in a few minutes. And finally, Annex helps you develop like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, Uber, meaning that develop in monorepos. Multiple teams, you don't have to have multiple teams, but in general you can, build multiple applications out of reusable packages in the same repository. There are a lot of advantages to it, like code reuse, being able to quickly iterate, perform large refactorings with ease. But to do this well, you need to have robust tooling, sort of a foundation that you can use to manage this repository so it scales well. Right? And Annex is this tooling. Okay, let's create an Annex workspace to see what it's like actually to use it if you are building an Angular application. I'm going to create a folder called example, and inside here I'm going to run create Annex workspace command. npx is an npm utility to fetch create Annex workspace, this package from npm, and it's going to run the script that is in the package. Okay. There are a few questions it will ask me. For example, the name of my workspace, which is not the name of my application, but rather the name of my organization or my team. Okay. Let's say we're building for a shop. Okay. So I selected the Angular preset over there, and which basically tells Annex, create an Annex workspace, install the Angular plugin, and create an Angular application using the Angular plugin. All right. I could have created an empty workspace just as well, and add the plugin myself, as you will see we will do later in this video. So this is just a shortcut. All right. So preset doesn't change how Annex works. So if you want to start with an empty one and Angular later, that's fine. If you want to add React to the Angular one, it will work just as well, or vice versa. Okay. So it's going to take a few minutes to perform npm install. All right, so we are done. There are two things that the script pointed out that we should explore. One is this interactive tutorial for Angular developers. Please check it out. It takes 10-15 minutes for you to go through the whole tutorial, and you will have a much more robust understanding of what Annex does and how it works. Secondly, you can look at this free course on YouTube that covers basically the same stuff I'm going to cover in this video, but does it in a sort of less ad hoc way. Please check it out as well. All right, this is our workspace. As you can see, it's an Angular CLI project, just an unusual one. Okay. The layout here is somewhat similar, but at the same time different. One thing that's different is that we have these two folders called apps and libs. The apps folder contains all the projects that are executable, something you can run. For example, you can bundle an application and run it in your client's browser. Right? You can have a node application you can run. You can have a suite of end-to-end tests you can run, etc. The libs folder contains projects, packages that aren't runnable. Just some code with well-defined public API you can test, lint, build independently, and then compose into larger units, larger lips or applications, right? So often, most of your code is written in libs or those packages, and you then compose them, right, into apps. So we have one of the apps called Shop, and Shop is essentially an Angular application that is very similar. If you've seen an Angular CLI project, that should look very familiar to you. Right? It's almost identical, with a few differences, like we're using Jest instead of Karma. But if you really want to use Karma, you can, right? You can tell Nx, please use Karma instead of Jest when you create Angular projects. It will work, okay? So let's build, clear that. Let's build my application. I'm going to build the Shop app. And in a few seconds, it takes about 30 seconds, we're going to see the result of this build. A few more seconds. Okay, cool. So it took about 24 seconds, right? That's quite a lot of time. And actually one of the reasons why Nx works, right? So this command, ng-build shop, every time we run it, it will take 25 seconds every single time, right? And that's an empty application, doesn't do anything. A large app will take a lot longer than this, right? So Nx, you can use the ng command when you are in an Nx workspace. It does work. It's an Angular CLI project. It's important to make this clear. However, you can also use the nx command. And the nx CLI is essentially the CLI that wraps the Angular CLI. So every single thing, let me run it, every single thing you can use when you use the Angular CLI, or the flags, or the options, they work exactly the same way with the Nx CLI because it just wraps it. However, it does it cleverly, right? It uses some source code analysis to be able to not rebuild, rerun, retest things that it doesn't need to rebuild, rerun, and retest. For example, right? If I run it again, it's instant, right? And I really mean instant. It takes, I don't know, fraction of a second to build it. So how is it that it's so fast now, right? The reason why it is so fast is that the Nx CLI, the one that wraps the Angular CLI, was able to look at the source code of our application, figure out what global things it needs, collect all this information, collect information about the environment we are running on. For example, in this case, it's a Pop! OS, so it knows the version of Linux I'm running, all those kind of things, the version of Node, collect the information about what exactly I'm trying to do. In this case, I'm building Shop. If I do --pro, that's a different thing I'm trying to do. It knows what I'm trying to do. So it collects all this information, creates a unique key for this computation, and checks whether it has computed such a thing before, the exact same thing. And if it did, instead of recomputing it, it just restores it from this computation cache, right? Let me show you. So if I remove dist, right, I'll show you there is no dist. And if I run it again, very fast, and my dist has my app right now, right? It's back. It hasn't been rebuilt by a Webpack because Webpack isn't that fast, right? It was retrieved by Nx from the computation cache. So the computation cache basically replaces the terminal output exactly the same way, and then restores all the files that would have been created if you ran this command legitimately, okay? It obviously doesn't work just with build. It works with any command. For example, if I do the test command, well, I'm using Jest. Here, Jest is already pretty fast compared to Karma, but the second time, it's even faster, right? And I will show you later why this is such an important feature. But TLDR, this helps you speed up your CI, for example, often by a factor of 10. You don't realize how many times you are rebuilding and rerunning the same things over and over again across your whole organization, right? And with Nx, you can avoid that, which is a very important thing, a very important feature. That's called computation cache. Another thing I want to show you, which is it's pretty cool, is that to use the computation cache, you have to do Nx. You have to use a different CLI. Even though it wraps the Angular CLI, not all of your teammates may be aware of it, right? So what I often do is I do something like this, and I do it for a lot of clients I work with, right? I'm just saying, hey, you can still type ng if you want, but then ng is just going to be an X because it works exactly the same way, it's just a lot faster, okay? And most people don't even know. They just, oh, look, my Angular CLI project suddenly got a lot faster. Well, it's because you're actually running the NX CLI that wraps the Angular CLI. All right, so I have the shop app, and the question is, how do I develop it? Normally, I would develop it by doing something like this. I would serve the app, I would make some changes, make sure the app reflects the changes, etc. That's a fine way of developing it, but we do it mostly because it's very hard to write high quality, easy to use end-to-end tests, right? So instead, I'm going to do the following. What I'm going to do instead, I'm going to run end-to-end test in a watch mode, and I'm going to develop my application together with end-to-end test at the same time. And I can only do it because the end-to-end test tool I used, the tool I used to run end-to-end tests, is ergonomic enough. So it kind of works, right, for me, right? So let me launch it. As you can see, the tool Next uses in this case for the show application is Cypress. Cypress is a very good tool for running end-to-end test. It's a lot more ergonomic than, say, Protractor. There are a lot of nice things about Cypress that I will maybe touch on a little bit, but this video is not about Cypress. The point here is that it's available to us right away, no extra setup required. So I have my application, right? And this is my test. So now my test is running. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to open my test, which is over here, and I'm going to change it. And I'm going, to change it to verify a few things. Firstly, and the card, I'm going to still verify that the greeting appears. Then I'm going to get an item added to my shopping cart. In this case, I'm going to add a blanket. The reason is because I just bought a blanket, so it's on my mind. And then I'm going to verify the status of the shopping cart. The status will say, hey, you have a single item in your shopping cart. Okay. So next, I'm going to change my the page object, and I'm going to add a few helpers. Don't worry about the helpers. Don't worry about understanding Cypress. The point is not to show you how Cypress works, but how NX works. Okay. So I have my test right now. And as you can see, it's simply verified that the cart is updated. This is my test. If I refresh it right now, you'll see that the test will fail because it won't be able to find a button for the blanket item, right? Because my app doesn't have any of that, right? It's still a Hello World app. So let's change the application. Note, my end-to-end test is still running. So I'm going to open my component, so the component of my shop application, right? And I'm going to cheat a little bit and just copy and paste. Oh, there is some garbage in here. Some stuff from a live template, just to save us some typing. I'm going to walk you through it. Right? So I have a very simple template, same header as before, and here I have a shopping cart. I'm just displaying the number of items in the cart, and then I'm looping over the items and allowing the user to add them by clicking on the button. And the component itself, the TypeScript code is very simple. A bunch of items are coded, and an add to cart click handler, right? So if I refresh the page right now, what I'm going to see is my application working. Okay, my test is working. So I'm doing sort of a legitimate TDD/BDD thing here, is that I'm starting with a test, some functionality I want to build. The test is actually running my application. Because Cypress is so fast and so easy to write tests in, I can actually do it. I don't have to spend hours figuring out how to construct the test. Most of the time it's fairly straightforward. And then I can implement the application to match the test while everything is running, right? And as you can see with Cypress, I can step through my test and see how my application reacts to it. And I can obviously do it if I refresh. I can also play with my app in here, right? The app is running. Okay, cool. That's a really cool feature. We added some basic functionality. Now let's do something even more interesting. So currently, the source code we have, I mean, it's not much of the source code, but the whole application is contained into this apps folder. That works, and if you are used to a regular Angular CLI project, that just looks very familiar. However, the main benefit of NX, where you actually see how awesome it is when you start carve out functionality from your application into libs, right? Because then you can define a public API that you cannot break, and enforce public API. For every lib, you can develop every part of your application as a unit and treat it as a unit, right? Have ownership assigned to it, etc. So in this case, let's say we are going to create a lib, and we're going to call it UI, right? And we're going to move some dumb components into this UILip, right? And if I run the command, I see my UILip created. That's pretty cool. So I will show you what it is. The UILip right now is creating the UI in the libs folder. We have it over here. It doesn't have anything that we care about yet, so we are going to add a component to that UILip. We'll generate a component called item list, and let's specify a project called UI, and we have this component. Inside the UI folder, it's declared. Also, let's export. I should have exported it, but let's do it right away here. Okay. So we have the item list component. Now what we want to do is we want to move the item list from the app module into that component, right? And make sure that application still works as it did before, right? So I'm going to go over here, just say, this is the item list HTML. Again, we just moved it from our main application, the same logic, right? I'm going to open the CSS. Again, it's exactly the same chunk of CSS. And finally, we have the TypeScript file. It's a dumb component, so it doesn't have any interesting logic. It simply takes an input, an array of items, and it has an output. So every time you click, it emits an event. So the only thing I need to do now is inside my component over here. Instead of doing this stuff, I simply actually import the UI module inside my application. Note, by the way, when I import this module, when I use this library, I do it as follows. I don't use a relative import, right? I have the import that has the name of my organization as a prefix, and then the name of my library. That allows me to eventually, and I mean, you can change this obviously for your library, allows me, if I want to publish this library, say, to my local Artifactory or to NPM. So inside my Monorepo, I can use it without going to Artifactory, but some other teams that, for example, need the same UI components can use it from an Artifactory, and it will work the same way, right? So in the next Monorepo, all your libraries are used as if they were published to an Artifactory, right? So you have the flexibility without really paying the cost of having to do it for every single library, right? So I have that. Now let me get the component, pass the items, and invoke the event handler, right? So nothing interesting here really, and I don't need this guy anymore, okay? So from what I can tell, my application should still be working exactly the same way. And I can verify it. If I run shop EndtoEnd -- watch, actually, let me run in a headless way. When I run in a headless way, it doesn't spawn a new version of Firefox, right? It does everything in the terminal. This is useful when you do stuff in CI, right? Okay, it works. So we didn't break anything, that's good. So what I'm going to do next is something that I think every Angular developer should be using, but very few do. So I have this dump component, and normally we would develop this dump component by, for example, writing Karma or Jest tests, right? And we'll be happy with this, we would think we're doing a good job. And I actually think this is the wrong way to test dump components, right? When we're building a design system with a lot of dump components that people can use to compose them into larger apps, the unit tests, the Karma and Jest tests, just under the right tools. So what you want is you want to run them in the browser so you can explore them, you can play with them. You want to write browser-based tests like Cypress tests, but only for those components. Thankfully, there is a tool called Storybook that helps you do exactly that. And Nrwl has a good plugin for Storybook, right? So let me show you how to set it up. Firstly, if you want to explore what plugins are available in general, right? At least the plugins that we as the Nrwl core team think you should be exploring, you can run an Nrwl list and you will see a bunch of plugins, right? You will see what is currently installed, what is available. In this case, a bunch of things are available. That's pretty cool. So what I am interested in Storybook. So if I run the same Nrwl list command with a Storybook, I will see a command that tells me how to install it. So I'm just going to do that. And it will take a few seconds. Okay, cool. So the interesting thing, if I run the same command again, I will see what is available in that plugin, right? Right now the plugin is already installed. It tells me what I can do with it, right? So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to generate a Storybook configuration for my UI project. So I have this UI project with a single component, okay? I'm going to generate a Storybook configuration. And yes, I want a Cypress end-to-end test app, and I will show you why it is awesome. And yes, I want to generate stories for my components. Sure. Okay, so I have it in there. Let me show you what has been created. There are a few things that appeared in my UI library. First of all, there is this .storybook folder, which is configured Storybook, right? We don't have to look into this right now. It's not that interesting. Secondly, there is a stories file. And the stories file is basically a place where I can describe how this component can be used, different scenarios of instantiating it, how it should be, like what parameters I can pass, what inputs, what outputs, things like that. In this case, this is not very helpful, right? Because the items is not actually text, so I have to change it, and it's I need to use a different helper to configure it. It will be object, and I'm going to the code blanket description fancy blanket. Okay, so now the stories file it's good. I mean, it's not very robust because the component is so basic, right? You can use it a lot more once your component gets more interesting. What I can do next is I can run my stories by doing Storybook. And in a few seconds, I will be able to explore all the components in my UI folder in an interactive environment. Okay, so let's open it. Okay, cool. So as you can see, this is an interactive environment. Let me zoom up a little bit. And I can, in this case, there is a single component on the left, and there is a single scenario of using it called the primary scenario. So it's not particularly interesting, but I can change it around, right? I can do this, and you will see, Oh shoot, it's the wrong thing. Yeah, I can change this, and you will see it's working. Uh, Again, for this particular component, that's not particularly handy, but for more interesting UI component, or when you have a lot of them, like a lot of organizations have essentially design systems, Storybook is a great tool for them, and Annex just has a plugin that helps you integrate Storybook into your dev workflow in a straightforward fashion. You don't need to do anything, just add a plugin, run a command, it's working. You just need to configure it a little bit after that. That's cool. What is cooler, however, right, and it ties back to what I was talking before about, is that we have a new end-to-end test project called UI end-to-end, and we have a Cypress test for every UI component. Each of those components is served using Storybook, right, and you can configure it to serve the right scenario, to pass the right options. But what I can do now, I can do NX end-to-end, UI end-to-end, -- watch. And instead of running end-to-end tests for my application, I will run tests. Those aren't end-to-end tests in the normal sense. I will run tests for my UI components. And if I'm a designer at a company who is primarily working on UI components, this is a much better way for me. Let me show you. There's a much better way for me to actually develop, right? I don't have to worry about the application. I don't have to worry about figuring out what to do with karma to make sure it kind of covers what I want to cover. I'm writing my tests using Cypress, so I'm actually running them in a browser. They run in different browsers, in this case Firefox, Chrome, Edge, whatnot. And I can develop by just constantly running my end-to-end tests, changing my components and seeing them being reflected in the tests. Okay? A very cool feature. Let me clear it. All right, so we created a single library right now, a library of UI components. That's a very good use case for using libraries because you tend to share, like say, dumb UI components or some utilities across your applications. But the benefits of having libraries isn't just code sharing. That's one advantage, but not the only one. The main one, I think, is that you are able to partition your application into well-defined units you can reason about independently. Right? So in this case, we have a shop app, and it's very small, so it's kind of hard to partition that, right? But we can imagine being a much larger app. So I'm going to show you what I would normally do, right, with my application to make it, to partition it into different units. Each of them can be developed independently, code reviewed independently, tested independently, right? So I'm going to add the router to my application just to make sure the application somewhat resembles a real app, right? And I'm going to generate two more libraries. I'm going to say I need a lib, and I'm going to call it feature main, and I'm going to pass a parent module. It will be apps shop source app.module.ts. I'm going to add the routing, and I want to be lazy. Sure. Okay, cool. I have one of them. And let me add another one, just to make it a bit more interesting. Let's say we have an about page or something. Okay, cool. I have two of them now. Let me change the paths. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to change this to be /about. And let me restart TypeScript service. Every time you add the removal library, it takes some time for TypeScript to figure it out, so I sometimes help it out a little bit. So I have two feature modules now. I have the main one and the about one. Let's go to the main one and copy the functionality from our app component, the one that actually shows the card, into the main one. Right, so I'm going to go inside here, right? This is my feature main module. I'm going to add a new component inside the main one. I'm going to say I need a component called main, and the project would be feature main. And I'll do the same for about, add an about component in there, right? So for the main module, I'm going to say if you land on it, and there's a main component, right? And I now will be able to take my app component and just move these functionality, right, into my main component. That is my main component. I can get this functionality over here, right? And I can also copy the styles over. Again, I can go over here, copy the styles, and I will copy the logic into my main component. And I don't care about this stuff. Okay, that's my main component. One thing I need to do, of course, is that I need to import UI module in here. Because I'm using the list component over there. Next, I need to open the about module, and I'm going to just wire up the about component over here. About component. Okay, cool. And finally, I need to remove all of this stuff. I don't need any of this anymore, right? And I can remove the styles. Don't care about them anymore. And I can remove this part and simply say I want to put a outlet in here. Finally, I want to links. Let's see if I have a menu links. Okay, cool. I'm going to add 2 links so I can switch between the 2 routes. So I see the application actually working. Right? Okay, cool. I'm good to go now. Right? I think we are ready. So what I'm going to do now, let me serve the application to make sure it is working. Okay. Okay, so I'm able to add stuff to the cart. I can go back and forth. All right. A very simple application, doesn't do anything interesting. However, what is interesting about it is that now instead of being all in one place, all the functionality of my application, I have it in a few libraries. I have a feature main, which in this case, the main chunk of the, my application. Let me close this guy. There is a feature about, which is a different feature. So often when I build application using Nrwl, and when people build application using Nrwl, they split the application into a lot of application-specific libraries, like feature libraries, right? Often dozens or even hundreds if it's a very, very large application. And a lot of reusable libraries like UI, right? And there is a lot more structure you can have in this lips folder. You can have subdirectories, you can group them by application and whatnot. But the idea is that some of these libraries will be reused and some won't be. And the reason to have an application isn't just to have a library, isn't just to reuse some code, but just to be able to well define the public API of this code, right? It's a big deal. So now another thing I want to show you that once I have it, I can run the debgraph command, and the debgraph is going to open. Let me zoom in a little bit. Sort of a diagram, right, of all the pieces of my application. So I have all the libraries, and I can zoom in on each of them, right? I can hide some of them or whatnot. And that's another killer feature of Nrwl, is that once your application keeps growing, and you have multiple applications in the same repo, being able to visualize them is exceptionally important, right? Being able to see how your application fits together matters a lot, right? So now what we have is we have an application, the shop app, composed out of 3 libraries: UI, feature main, feature about. And we can deal with each of those libraries independently, right? We could test feature about, we could test feature main, right? All of this could work, right? The problem is that as the number of libraries keeps growing, right, you won't be able to manage it. Right? If you have a medium-sized application, let's say composed out of 50 libraries, you won't be able to know which ones to run in what order, etc. Right? That's isn't just impractical; it's almost impossible. So what Annex is good at is at figuring out how these libraries fit together, and it can use this information, as we saw, like the depth graph, to do this work for us. So instead of figuring out what needs to rerun, you can simply say, I want to rerun the shop app, that returns the shop app with all its dependencies, right? And you can say, I want to do it in parallel, if you want to, right? And so it's going to tell us it's testing the shop app and its 3 dependencies, and in a second we'll be done. If we run it again, by the way, it's going to be instant, right? And it will tell us that it was able to retrieve all the results from the cache, that nothing was actually computed this time. If I make a change to the about library, to the feature about library, some change, and I rerun the same command again, what I'm going to see, I was running it again, so it's already in a cache, but I can run this command again, and the result that I'm going to see is that the about library and the main app have been retested, but the other 2 haven't been. Right? We see that 2 out of 4 projects were retrieved from the cache, and that's what the power of computation caching really is, where it really comes in. That once you start having a lot of packages in your workspace, it doesn't mean a lot of apps. You can have a single application composed out of 50 libraries. Only a small fraction of them will have to be rebuilt, retested, relinked every single time. The rest can be retrieved from cache, and you get much better results because of that. Right? And it obviously works with any command, with lints and builds, etc. Right? It works even better once I have more than one application. For example, let's say I have a second application called an admin app. And just to make the, okay, just 1 second. It's again in the same place where the shop app is, right? I'm going to open the admin app. I'm just going to make it a bit more interesting. I'm going to import a UI module in here, again, in the same fashion, right? Using this, the import syntax, not the relative import. And let me show you the depth graph. We will see the depth graph here now shows there are 2 applications. Let me zoom out. Depending on the UI library, there's a bunch of stuff depending on the UI library, right? And the cool part right now, is that I can, when I test my shop app, right, with all the dependencies in parallel, right now it's going to retest everything, because every time you add an application, you invalidate the cache, because who knows what you affect in your workspace. Okay, but so the shop app right now is tested. If I test my admin app in the same fashion, what I'm going to see, and that's very important, is that it's going to retest the admin app itself, but it was able to get the results for the UI library from the cache. Right? And that's a big deal, in that once you have a monorepo with more than one application in the same repo, what you're essentially getting is the ability to reuse computation done by someone else, by some other team. Right? If you have a different team building the same library, testing the same library, you don't have to do it. You can just take advantage of their computation, right? And everyone who works with companies like Google know how big of a deal it is, because most of the time someone else already did what you're trying to do. Okay. And once you have more than one library, instead of saying, I want to test admin app with dApps and shop app with dApps, you can also tell Annex, hey, just test everything, right? And you can either list the projects here or just say, I actually want everything, right? And in this case, note, it was instant, right? Because we already did this work just a second ago. Annex doesn't have to redo it. It retrieves everything from the cache, right? So the bigger the graph that we are seeing, the bigger the gains. And any substantial Annex project will have dozens and often even hundreds of libraries, right? So, or even more than that. We're talking about a very large graph where on average, every command only has to redo a small fraction of it. Right? And it gets even more interesting once you add backend applications in the same workspace. You have an API, you have to serve like this and run and test like this, because then your backend and frontend can share some code. And then again, you're saving work by using the computation cache. Okay, So we looked at the cache. The cache is a big deal, and I will show you how big of a deal it is in a second. But there is a second part of an Nx that I mentioned at the beginning, which is code change analysis. All right. So the cache, essentially what it does, it looks at the state of your world, of your computer, what you're trying to do, the environment, and it sees if you or someone else on your team has already done it. It tries to speed up your command by doing so, right? So it looks at the state of the world at the moment in time. It doesn't know what you're trying to do. It just checks what you have, right? There is a second part of an Nx that looks at, let me check it in, that looks not at what you're trying to do, or not at what you have, but rather at what you're trying to do. It looks at the code change, at the pull request you're trying to submit, and it tries to figure out what is affected by that pull request. For example, let's say I have a branch called update main, right? And I go into main component, the TS, and I make a change in here, some change. I will show you. This is a change. So this is my pull request. I can commit, it doesn't really matter, but this is my pull request. I only updated this file, right? So what an Nx is able to do is to look at this pull request, understand the nature of the change. It doesn't just check what files you change. For example, if you have a package, the JSON, and you update a version of the package your application doesn't use, but some other applications in the repo uses, it will know who is using what, right? So it's able to look at the nature of the change itself and figure out what has to happen, what you need to retest, rebuild, relint to make sure the workspace is still green verified, right? And you can see this by doing affected libs, right? Affected libs will print what is affected by this change. There is single lib affected. The about lib hasn't been affected. Affected apps, right? The shop app is affected. The admin app wasn't affected by this change, right? In this case, it knows this. So, and you can also look at this change in a graph form, right? Again, and let me select all. You can see the graph, and the whatever is in red is what is affected by your pull request, right? It's a big deal. The reason why it is a big deal, because it knows the nature of the change, so it often can reduce the number of things that needs to rebuild and retest more than the cache code, right? So the code change analysis is very good at creating the smallest possible list of projects that you have to rebuild and retest, and the cache allows you never to rebuild and retest the same thing twice. So the combination of the two is what gives you amazing performance, right? And then we saw in run menu we have two lists of projects, right, that we want to retest and rebuild. If you use affected, you don't have to. You can just say I want to run affected test. As you can see, it's only retesting the two projects that have been changed or that can be affected and broken by this change, which is the feature itself and the application that depends on it. Then, if you run second time, the caching kicks in and it is fast, right? So most of the time when folks build CIs, CI setups, or even run it locally, they don't retest an individual project or use run many as much. They often use affected build, affected lint to basically say, Nx, look at my workspace, see what I changed, figure out what my change can break, rebuild and retest what I can break in parallel as much as possible. And if you can have some cached results elsewhere, that I can use to speed up this command, do it. Right. So most of the time, you don't even know about the machinery behind the scene that makes it fast. You're just saying the retest everything that's affected, and it does it, and it's fast. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you today is how to extend your computation cache, how to share it with your coworkers or maybe with the whole community. Because it's cool that I am able not to rerun the same things over and over again, and Nx can help me out, can figure it out and provide the results. But it would be even better if I was able to take the computation results from my teammates or from my CI. Okay, so let's do it. So to do that, I need to go to an Nx.app, it's an Nxcloud, and I need to, let's ignore this annoying pop-up, and I can register an account in there. You can create a new account. It's very easy. Victor Demo 30. I've been creating a lot of accounts, so running out of handles, and I can create an account. And in here, when my account is created, I will be able to create a new workspace. I can give it a name. Demo Workspace. I can configure access tokens. It gives me the instructions on what to run. Let's say I can copy this command and I can, sorry, that's the wrong window, and I can run it over here. And what it does, essentially, it installs the npm package, and it changes the default runner, the runner I use to actually execute my commands. NX uses this runner under the hood. It will change it to a different one. That NX Cloud runner to what is this? Let me force it to reload from disk. Okay, cool. So this runner uses NX Cloud. NX Cloud is a runner that wraps the default one, but it also helps with the stable caching. The next step in here is to configure CI, right? I don't want to bother with CI, so to imitate, I'm going to replace my local access token with the CI one, the one that has more permissions. But if you're setting up yourself, please follow the instructions, right? Don't do what I do, right? And after that, that's basically it, right? I have this dashboard over here that will show me the savings and how the distributed cache works. Right now I haven't run anything, so there is nothing there to show. All right, so I have this guy over here, and I will be able to right now take advantage of it. So again, I'm running everything that I was running before. I can run any command in any way I want. I'm not constrained. I don't need to refactor anything to make distributed cache work. I don't need to rethink how I develop. I don't need to author a gazillion configuration files that may or may not be useful. I turn it on, and in a few seconds, right, I'm building my applications as I was building them before I turn it on, right? Nothing has changed. But the crucial thing here would be that I will be able to share my cache with my teammates, right? So it's a prod build, so it's taking some time because it's running Cursor, doing tree shaking, etc. In a few seconds, we're going to get that build completed. Okay, it took some time, right? If I run it again, by the way, it retrieved from the local cache, right? This part works as before, right? I don't need to have the cloud part. The cool part about cloud is if I'm someone else right now, some other person, if I'm Susan, who is sitting next to me in the office or something, and if she runs it, the same code, right? And she'll be able to get it from cloud. I'm not Susan, and I don't want to switch machines right now because it's too much effort. So instead, I'm going to remove my local cache, okay? So right now I don't have any local cache, so as if I was Susan, and that's basically it. And I can run this command again. This time again, I have no local cache, and it's going to fetch it from the cloud, right? The end. And it is fast. And what is cool about it is that once you think about this, every time I pull master and I run, for example, run many target test dash all, these commands will always be instant. The master is tested, right? So things like that suddenly become a lot faster, right? The CI will get a lot faster because every agent that you have in your CI is a separate machine. Once they're able to share the same cache, the vast majority of your CI runs will be close to instant, will be very, very fast, right? We're seeing 3 to 5 times improvements without you having to rethink anything. You just turn it on, your CI gets 3 times faster, right? Okay, cool. Let's summarize. So NX is a set of dev tools for Monorepos, sort of extensible dev tools for Monorepos. By itself, doesn't do very much, but because it has this plugin ecosystem, you can install those plugins to match the needs of your organization. So I think of NX, I'm not using VS Code right now, by the way, I'm using IntelliJ. But I think of sort of VS Code of build tools. By itself, doesn't do anything. The power of VS Code is in its plugins, same as with NX. It helps you use modern tools, right? Those plugins I'm talking about. Things like Cypress, Storybook, Jest, and Prettier all work really well in NX because the plugin support is strong and they compose well, right? So you can use all of them together to create a very coherent and effective dev experience. it is an intelligent build tool that has computation caching, and affected commands, right? And code change analysis commands. Both of them, computation caching and affected, try to solve the same problem, which is I want to make sure all the commands are running really fast. They try to solve it in two different ways, so the combination of them provide the best result. And finally, it helps you develop Google, Facebook, Twitter, and I don't mean it in that you suddenly will have the repo of the same size, but some of the best practices that have been used at companies, you can use them right away, and NX is a good tool for you to do that, right? You can build a lot of packages, some of them are reusable, some of them not. Each of them have well-defined public API and can be tested or linked independently. You can share them with your coworkers, right? And all of those things are a lot easier with NX, and some of this stuff, of the computation caching effect, is required to make it work because it has to be fast, and NX can make sure it is fast. But there is a second part of NX I didn't show today, which is more about scaling your organization, like being able to enforce some rules in your workspace, enforce ownership to make sure it doesn't become a chaos or like a big ball of mud. All of this stuff is in there, and you can read up on it if you go to annex.dev. So please check out annex.dev. If you're an Angular developer, honestly, even if you're building a small app, the NX experience will be, I believe, a lot better than the regular Angular CLI experience. But if you're building anything substantial, like a mid-sized to large app or multiple applications, using NX just gives you so much more that I feel like it's a shame if you don't give it a try. Thank you.